First, there were 27. Now there is one. The message sent by voters in one of the most closely watched mayoral contests in the country. That's today on the Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. The race to replace the term-limited mayor of San Antonio decided by voters this weekend. The outcome and what it may mean for Texas politics writ large. Red flags over safety issues in some Texas group homes. With the rise of data centers across Texas, a push for private power plants run by natural gas. A new film about a space explorer who felt the pressure to hide part of her life despite her fame. And the Texas-born band leader who popularized Czech music and made it swing. All those stories and a whole lot more coming up today on the Texas Standard. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 9th day of June 2025. I'm David Brown, and it's already been a long day for many in North and Northeast Texas as folks try to assess the damage wrought by powerful storms last night and into this morning. No injuries reported at last check, good news, but as the sun rose over Fannin County, the roads were such a hazard with downed trees and power lines. Officials were urging folks to stay home till cleanup could be completed. Meanwhile, it's believed a lightning strike set a newly built home ablaze near Arlington last night as storms bore down on the Metroplex. Another fire in a new subdivision in McKinney, believed to be storm-related, remains under investigation. WFAA-TV reports damaging wind speeds of up to 65 miles per hour Sunday night in parts of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, while parts of Navarro County reported 70 to 80 mile per hour winds early this morning. That's derecho weather. While many started their day without electricity, crews have been largely successful in quickly restoring power, with most remaining outages in Far East Texas as we hit the airwaves. Southeastern Texas, including Houston, expected to get the back end of all of this, with storms and advisories expected for much of this week. Conditions could change quickly, so keep it here for the latest. Texas political forecasters certainly have their work cut out for them in the aftermath of one of the most closely tracked elections in the country. The race for a successor to the term-limited mayor of San Antonio, Ron Nirenberg. It started with 27 candidates. That alone was enough to grab the attention of the national news media. It finally came down to two, a Republican and a Democrat, in a contest that is technically nonpartisan, but widely seen as a political litmus test in a mostly red state. To tell us how it all turned out and help us understand what it all adds up to, Joey Palacios, who's been following this story for our partners at Texas Public Radio in San Antonio. Joey, welcome back.
Thanks, David.
Let's not bury the lead, as they say. Tell us about the winner, Gina Ortiz Jones. I believe she was a former official in the Biden era in the Defense Department.
Right. So Ortiz Jones is 44 years old. She's the former Undersecretary of the Air Force, which is the highest civilian job overseeing the Air Force and the Space Force. She's attended San Antonio's John Jay High School, and after high school, she joined the Air Force, where she was sent to Iraq. Now, San Antonio, this is something really interesting about her. She is the third female mayor in San Antonio's history. First one was in the 70s, and then last one was 10 years ago. She's also the first mayor who would be openly gay. Throughout election night, her and her campaign were in very high spirits. They maintained a lead throughout the night. Here's what she said to supporters before the night was over.
We are so excited about what is possible for our city. Are we not? With everything happening around us at the federal level and at the state level, some of the most un-American things we have seen in a very, very long time.
Three of her top priorities as mayor would be public safety, housing affordability, and early education and child care.
All right, well, let's talk about her challenger in the runoff. That would be Rolando Pablos. I understand he was a rather close ally of Texas GOP leaders.
So Rolando Pablos and Gina Ortiz Jones are heavily opposed in the left-right, red-blue ideology of current partisanism, even though, as you mentioned, city council politics are nonpartisan. Their political leans were very clear. Pablos was heavily backed by Republicans. For instance, the Texas Economic Fund raised $1.3 million in support of him for this race.
Wow.
Getting Pablos in office was highly desired by Greg Abbott, who one could speculate would want to break into the blue strongholds of major cities in Texas. For example, in a statement, the Texas Democratic Party said that, quote, despite Governor Abbott and his MAGA billionaires spending millions of dollars in support of Pablos, San Antonio voters cast their ballots decisively for Gina Ortiz Jones, a Democrat who will bring down the cost of living for working families.
Okay, so let me ask you something. Let me cut in here because the Texas Democratic Party saying this was a decisive win. What was the final tally?
Yeah, so Gina Ortiz Jones won the election with 54% of the vote. She actually had about a 12,000 vote edge over Pablos.
Very interesting. This was a very closely watched race, and I say that because I'm talking about beyond San Antonio, in fact, beyond Texas. I mentioned that this was seen as a kind of political litmus test in what was technically a nonpartisan race. How much did the partisan divide take up the conversation leading to this runoff? I mean, was this something that a lot of San Antonians sort of saw as a proxy battle between pro-Trump Texas and a more progressive Texas?
Gina Ortiz Jones was seen as a champion, pretty much, among the folks who saw Kamala Harris lose the November election. So this was probably very redeeming to people who wanted to see more blue in positions of power across the state. For instance, the Democratic Party nationally made a statement congratulating Gina Ortiz Jones. They said that this victory further extends a significant streak of Democratic overperformances in competitive elections in 2025. And they touted being proud to send up to or organize about 200 volunteers in San Antonio in support of her.
Of course, it does fit another kind of narrative in Texas, though, and that being that state officials have been predominantly Republican, but in many of the bigger cities, we've seen Democratic or Democratic-leaning mayors elected, right?
Right. So, one of the things that comes to mind right now is that the city council makeup overall in San Antonio is going to shift slightly to the left. Not by much, but more than where it currently is. So while Ortiz Jones will lead a more progressive city council than in years past, UTSA political science professor John Taylor says that may allow her to accomplish some of her goals, but she and the new city council will face some significant challenges.
Trying to basically deal with not only a budget shortfall, but potential of cutting services and still dealing with the problems that we're dealing with in this city, from crime to transportation to income inequality.
That was UTSA Professor John Taylor there. Joey, from the ground in San Antonio, what stood out to you about this election? What seemed to be the most talked about topic?
Overall, it was the political divisiveness that we saw in this. We've talked a few times about this being nonpartisan when it comes to council races, but again, this was just so apparent, and I think it caught a lot of people's attention who may not necessarily really look at local races that much. The turnout here was 17%, probably one of the highest turnouts we've seen in a local election. Also, something to notice, the council's gender ratio shifted a little bit. There will now be 7 women on the council and 4 men. And another major point, this was the first city council election where the winners would serve for 4 years instead of 2 years. That means most of the council, including Mayor-elect Gina Ortiz Jones, will serve in office until 2029 and potentially another 4 years after that.
After which time, I believe there's still term limited, right?
Yeah, term limits now are 8 years.
Joey Palacios has been following this story for our partners at Texas Public Radio in San Antonio. Joey, thanks so much for the update.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
Last month, after 2 group home employees were arrested for assaulting a man with severe autism, it highlighted failures in the state's care system that advocates and a federal judge have repeatedly criticized for its failures to investigate and combat abuse and neglect. Paul Flav of the Texas Newsroom has more.
The May arrest of two Malfu Home Health employees in San Antonio follows the near death of a 15-year-old at another Malfu facility in Sugar Land. In that 2024 case, the boy's attorney told the state he had been over-medicated, nearly to death. In a statement, Beth Mitchell with Disability Rights Texas told the Texas Newsroom that these are not isolated events. Quote, "The reason these systemic issues persist is because the state has failed to establish a regulatory system that holds providers accountable. The Health and Human Services Commission regulates these providers. Its investigators have been criticized by numerous advocates and families, as well as by a federal judge, who levied $100,000 a day fines against the commissioner over failures to promptly investigate abuse and neglect. In an email, the department responded that the most recent legislature had approved funding to hire nearly 36 more investigators. They also raised rates for providers, which had been criticized for paying employees less per hour than many fast food jobs. Justin Botter is Vice President of Long-Term Care and Intellectual Disabilities at the Center for Healthcare Services. He says the new $13 an hour is still not enough.
If you can get the rates raised to improve quality, the rest all falls in line.
HHSC says Malfu Home Health currently operates 37 group homes, and there are currently 98 pending investigations against the provider for abuse and neglect. Jeff Duncan's stepson lives in one of Malfu's facilities in San Antonio, separate from the one where the alleged assault took place. He says it's dirty and the staff are ill-trained, but they don't have many other options. Duncan and his wife have gone to Austin to advocate for more funding for providers, but his experience with lawmakers has left him cynical.
It's just about money. I mean, they'll tell you what you want to hear, and in the end, nothing gets done.
He says they're now trying to move their son to a new facility and are looking at one right now. I'm Paul Flav in San Antonio.
Social media editor Wells Dunbar's monitoring the talk of Texas on this Monday. What you got there, Wells?
Howdy, David. Hundreds of people rallying in San Antonio and Houston over the weekend, protesting increased efforts by federal authorities to detain and deport undocumented immigrants. Those demonstrations concurrent with unrest in California, where people protesting ICE operations there have been met with police resistance. President Trump intensifying the situation by deploying National Guard troops in California over the state's objections, a move without parallel in modern political memory. On our Facebook page, Brittany says the protests were largely peaceful. The National Guard had no business being deployed out there. ICE and law enforcement escalated things, and now protesters are being blamed for the chaos. Meanwhile, Carolyn says that the hypocrisy of this administration knows no bounds. Pardons to January 6th rioters who beat Capitol Police with flagpoles, but according to Trump, we're going to hit them hard if they even as much spit on an ICE officer. However, Jim Erskine saying, thank goodness we have a president who won't allow rioters to burn down cities. Just some of the perspectives there, David. I'll be back with more later in the program.
We'd like to hear from you. Look for Texas Standard on your social media platform of choice. Coming up, could one byproduct of artificial intelligence mean greater reliance on carbon-based fuel? Why Texas may prove ground zero for the answer to that one. That story and a whole lot more as the Texas Standard continues.
Support for Texas Standard comes from UNT's online master's degree in Advanced Data Analytics program, preparing business professionals to shape the next generation of AI business solutions. More at online.unt.edu/data analytics.
I'm Jason Mellard from the Center for Texas Music History at Texas State University. This week in Texas music history, Central Texas meets Central Europe in one of the more colorful corners of Western swing. On June 8, 1916, Western swing bandleader Adolph Hofner was born in Moulton, Texas, to parents of German and Czech heritage, and Adolph and his brother Emil grew up speaking Czech. The family moved to San Antonio, where the brothers started a band with Simon Garcia called the Hawaiian Serenaders. Fiddler Jimmy Rivard heard them play and built a new group, the Oklahoma Playboys, around Adolph's Bing Crosby-like croon. Rivard's Playboys first recorded in October 1936 at the Texas Hotel, and a rivalry heated up between the Playboys and the Tune Wranglers as to who was San Antonio's hottest swing band. That is, until Adolph Hofner formed his own group in 1938, combining his pop croon with brother Emil's twangy steel guitar and a repertoire rich in popular German and Czech language standards. They had their first hit with the record Maria Elena on Bluebird, and then switched to Decca Records in 1941. World War II put a dent in their plans, though, as a German-American country singer named Adolph was not the most marketable commodity. Hofner recovered in the post-war years both due to the period's unlikely polka boom and a high-profile deal Hofner struck with San Antonio-based Pearl Beer. His band became the Pearl Wranglers and would carry the name through the 1990s. Adolph Hofner played a role in the popularization of such standards as It Makes No Difference Now, and may have been the first to record dance floor favorite Cotton Eye Joe, which Hofner claimed to have learned from an old man in New Braunfels. Hofner's band was also among the first to incorporate drums fully into the Western Swing Ensemble, an important step in bringing the instrument into country music. Even without this list of firsts, Adolph Hofner stands as a prime example of Western Swing's melting pot philosophy, a musical rendition of Texas diversity through its inclusion of country and blues, polka and ranchera, and so much more besides. You can hear music from the Lone Star State 24/7 on the Texas Music Experience at tmx.fm. For the Texas Standard, I'm Jason Mellard.
Support for This Week in Texas Music History comes from Brain Audio, maker of a compact portable speaker featuring an internal subwoofer that produces deep bass sound. Engineered in the live music capital of the world. More at brainaudio.com. That's BRANE audio.com.
And you're listening to the Texas Standard. Computers are getting busier. Think cyber currencies and artificial intelligence. We've reported on how the data center boom in Texas is leading to issues like how to meet the growing demand for energy, prompting some to consider bypassing the grid and building small nuclear plants, but with serious questions like what to do with radioactive waste, for starters. That idea has been getting some pushback, as you might imagine. Now, some are trying to advance an alternative, one with its own pluses and minuses, but one that Texas may be uniquely well suited to. Arcelia Martin is a reporter for Inside Climate News. Arcelia, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're talking about private power plants run by natural gas. So are some of these up and running now, or is this just in the proposal stages?
Some of these are up and running. Some data center developers have already commissioned gas plants to be sited near their centers so that way they can get power from them. And other ones are looking at gas plant development as a way to bypass the lengthy line of interconnection requests right now in the state's grid.
So I understand that some residents around these centers are saying not so private. They have some concerns. What did you hear from folks who live near these?
Sure. My colleague who I wrote this story with, Dylan Badur, he went out and spoke with residents of different communities who have either heard that a gas plant for a data center is coming to their area, or it's already being constructed. And I think a major concern for folks is the pollution and also just the noise from construction and also operation, which I should say that a lot of the data centers have pushed back on the noise aspect once it's running. But I think once residents catch wind that these gas plants, for example, that are sited for these data centers or just to serve the increased energy demand we're going to see from, and we are seeing from these data centers, when they catch wind that they're permitted to emit and pollute, I think it causes them some concern that they'll be in the crossfire of that.
So we talked about some of the drawbacks of nuclear power, but why natural gas plants specifically? Wouldn't renewables such as solar or wind also be an option?
Previously, it was assumed that renewables would take the role of powering these data centers, but that really hasn't been the case. It seems more so that natural gas has kind of stepped up as the fuel source that folks are looking for. It's heralded for its reliability and its speed to get up. But right now, the constraint that the gas industry is seeing is, like a lot of other industries, supply chain issues with getting essential parts for these gas plants to their customers, including gas turbines. And, the wait times of those are looking around 5 years. So if you're trying to get a gas plant up and running today, you kind of have a bit of a wait on your hands.
Now, is this a requirement for these data centers that they provide their own source of energy, or do they see this as just sort of a necessity for their own operations?
They see this more as a way to get their data center online quickly. There is the way that you can, or a data center developer could connect their project to our grid, but the wait time on that can take a long time. So a lot of projects, they either, most projects are also looking to get onto the state grid, but want to ensure that they have reliable power all of the time by procuring their own energy source.
Well, and I guess this is one of the things that we have heard from developers is that if they are in a situation where the grid does need power, that they might be able to feed it back. And that's sort of a selling point, I guess, for neighbors. Is that still something that you're hearing?
Sure. I mean, I think folks are making the argument that by creating demand, they're also incentivizing more build out of all fuel types. I know that one data center developer I spoke to who is using the grid. So that means that their data center is run primarily on renewable energy because of where they're located in West Texas. They make the argument that the demand that they are supplying encourages new renewable energy plants to be built in West Texas. Gas companies have really run into an unexpected gold rush from data center development, and I'm really curious to see how it'll play out.
Well, Arcelia Martin will be watching. She is a reporter for Inside Climate News. We'll link to that article at texasstandard.org. Arcelia, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the beef-loving Texans at the Texas Beef Council, a community passionate about what they eat, where it comes from, and how it's prepared. Recipes and meal ideas at beeflovingtexans.com. Support for Texas Standard comes from the Texas ABLE program, helping eligible Texans with disabilities save and plan for the future to pay for qualified disability expenses with a tax-advantaged ABLE account. Learn more at texasable.org.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Alexandra Hart. Power is being restored to 87,000 customers in North Texas after a string of violent storms swept through the area. Governor Greg Abbott ordered state resources to be ready as severe weather conditions will continue this week across large parts of the state. Several bills from this year's legislative session in Austin are still sitting on the governor's desk waiting to be signed. That includes legislation banning consumable hemp products containing any amount of THC. Houston area State Senator Paul Betancourt told Inside Texas Politics this weekend that he understands the opposition, but unregulated products are a problem.
There's clearly medical uses of these cannabinoids that are acceptable and that help people. And then you've got to balance it with this totally unregulated out-of-state business that's flooding, gas stations and whatever counters with these unregulated products.
The deadline for Governor Abbott to sign or veto the bill is June 22nd. He could also not sign the legislation and let it take effect that way. Immigration rights activists say ending Texas in-state tuition for students without legal status will hurt the state's economy. KUT's Becky Fogel reports.
Linda Corchado is the Senior Director of Immigration for Children at Risk. She says in 2022, 57,000 undocumented students were enrolled in Texas colleges and universities.
These students contributed $81.6 million in tuition fees to Texas public institutions.
Corchado says ending the 2001 Texas DREAM Act will have significant economic consequences.
Texas rescinded the 2001 law after the Justice Department filed suit, saying it discriminated against U.S. citizens. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality is asking Texas residents for input on a proposed new rule on air quality. As KERA's Pablo Arauz-Peña reports, environmental advocates say it would use money paid by motorists to offset pollution caused by industry.
Under the new rule, money from an emissions reduction grant program would go to paying fees against large industries that create air pollution. The program is funded through things like vehicle titles and commercial vehicle inspections. Catherine Guerra with the watchdog group Public Citizen calls the proposed rule a, quote, accounting trick.
So it's not going to generate any new revenue, and it won't lead to any new pollution reductions as it is intended to do.
TCEQ says the rule does not propose a fee for motorists. I'm Pablo Arauz-Peña in Dallas.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from Aspire Allergy and Sinus, providing same-day results and custom treatment plans to tackle allergies at the root of the problem. Over 40 locations throughout Texas. More info at aspireallergy.com.
33 minutes past the hour Texas Standard Time. I'm David Brown. Well, we were just hearing a lot of talk about the possible use of gas plants at data centers, and with artificial intelligence on the rise, we're seeing more and more of these data centers, buildings full of servers that store and move information. Well, what happens when one of these data centers plans to move in next door? Maya Fawaz of KUT reports.
The road to Abigail Lindsay's house in Hays County passes through softly rolling hills. Then the odd home starts to break up the green pasture. A sign that reads, "No data center" in capital letters sits outside Lindsay's property, but there's no one around to read it. Just an empty house on the lot across the street, about half a dozen cows, and some old, towering cedar, elm, and live oak trees.
There's going to be a freaking data center literally across the street. We don't have high-speed internet. Do you know what I use for internet? A dish.
When Lindsay was young, her family bought some acres and an old house in this rural part of Hays County. Lindsay got older and moved away for some time, but 5 years ago, she came back and bought a house next door to her family.
There's 4 generations right here. There's my grandmother, my mom and dad, myself, my sister, and then my son.
Things were different when she moved back. The nearby city of San Marcos had grown substantially, and development had inched closer to the land she grew up on. Now it was moving in next door.
I feel like right now we're in a gold rush. It's a rush to the market because a few people are going to make billions.
The company Cloudburst Data Centers, based in Denver, Colorado, is behind this new development. This will be its flagship location. Data centers take a lot of power to run, and they require lots of water for their cooling systems. Residents living nearby had questions about how this might affect air, light, and noise pollution, and where the data center plans to get all this water from, especially as the region sees ongoing drought. Lindsay says her worries eventually gave way to action. She started going door to door, handing out flyers and telling neighbors about the data center plans. Then she heard there would be a chance to address Cloudburst representatives at a Hays County Commissioners meeting in late May.
In addition, the constant burning of natural gas would pollute the atmosphere.
Dozens of people showed up, a mix of neighbors and San Marcos residents who had heard about the development. Everyone who spoke was against it.
As others said, we're set to run out of water by 2047. I mean, we've all seen the photos.
Lakes are rapidly drying up. Canyon Lake is 54.2% empty.
How can Cloudburst justify this type of development in an area with prolonged drought conditions and stage 3 water restrictions year-round?
After public comments, Cloudburst Representative Cynthia Thompson took the floor. She made the case for why this facility is needed.
The businesses that operate every day use a data center whether they realize it or not. So when you Google someone, when you take a picture, all that goes in the cloud, and so you need more data center space to hold that.
Cloudburst originally set out to have net zero facilities and data centers that would run entirely on renewable energy. Then the company signed a contract to power its upcoming data center with natural gas.
That's our ultimate goal, is to be green, to operate in a green fashion. Unfortunately, that's just not available to us today.
After the discussion, Hays County officials said they don't have the final say in how this development takes shape because of the data center's location. It spans both Hays and Guadalupe counties. Hays County Commissioner Walt Smith said, "Texas counties have less power than cities on what gets built."
I've testified at least a dozen times in our state legislature, and this is not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. It's a development issue that directly impacts my precinct and everyone else's precincts up here.
Hays County Judge Ruben Becerra said commissioners' hands are tied.
We can do absolutely nothing about it, even if we were 100% lockstep alongside you. How does that feel for powerless? Elections matter. State control has us hamstrung.
Cloudburst plan to begin construction this spring, but that's been delayed. It's unclear what the company's new timeline will be. After the May meeting outside of the Hays County Courthouse in San Marcos, Abigail Lindsay wondered what her next steps would be.
I was just worried about my health and my family's health and my son, and I don't know. I just cry, and it's really hard because I know what's coming, and it's going to look completely different.
She's been taking videos of what things currently look and sound like from the edge of her property.
Monday, June 2nd, 2:30, in front of my parents' house. May 8th, 2025, here's my property.
With development on the horizon, Lindsay is looking to preserve what she can of her surroundings.
It's March 29th, 2025. I just want to show how quiet it is here at my house.
I'm Fawaz in Hays County.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Galveston Historical Foundation, celebrating Juneteenth. As Juneteenth's birthplace, visitors can explore exhibits, tours, and events honoring the legacy of freedom all month long. More at galvestonhistory.org/Juneteenth 2025.
It's not just about the brisket or the ribs or the sausage or even the sides. It's the culture and people who are passionate about it. Where there's smoke, there's Daniel Vaughn, Texas Monthly Barbecue Editor. Join us next Thursday on the Texas Standard.
Support for Where There's Smoke comes from H-E-B.
You've got it tuned to the Texas Standard. I'm Laura Rice. There are a few names in space exploration we all know. Tops among them likely Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Sally Ride. Sally blasted into fame when it was announced she'd be the first American woman in space. But the fame came at a cost. An extremely private person, Sally felt the need to hide her relationship with her female life partner from the world. A new documentary explores that. Sally premiered at Sundance and had its Texas premiere at South by Southwest. On June 16th, it'll be on National Geographic and Disney+. Christina Costantini wrote and directed the documentary. Christina, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I imagine the answer is yes, but did you grow up with stories of Sally Ride?
Absolutely. So Sally was my hero as a kid, which is part of where this film came from. You know, seeing a woman in a jumpsuit going into space as a young woman, that was just symbolically so cool. And I thought, you know, if Sally can go to space, I'm a girl, maybe I can do big, important things too. And I think that was the beginning of my obsession with Sally Ride. And as I got older and I learned more about Sally, I just became more obsessed. And then when she died in 2012, I learned with the rest of the country that she was survived by her female life partner, Tam O'Shaughnessy. And that made me think, oh my God, if it was that hard to be a woman at the time and be an astronaut, imagine having this love story that you were keeping secret, and what would have that been like? So that kind of started me on my journey into making this film, was that curiosity.
Well, let me ask you about that, because Sally did want to keep this so secret. So what made you want to do the opposite and make a whole story about this thing that she spent her whole life really hiding?
Well, you know, I mean, the turning point for me was meeting Tam O'Shaughnessy, was meeting her life partner. And Tam wanted to tell this story and celebrate their amazing life together and their love story in a way that it couldn't have been celebrated at the time. And so, Tam is the main narrator of her story, and this romance is from her perspective. And, you know, I wanted to show that many of our heroes throughout history are not the people who we thought they were, because of the time periods that they came up in. And Sally is an amazing American hero, But, this story is really for anyone who's ever had to hide part of themselves to get where they want to go and to follow their dreams. Sally, I think, embodies that struggle herself.
Well, as you mentioned, Tam O'Shaughnessy, Sally's life partner, always wanted to be more out than Sally did. Do you think that this was a cathartic process for her making this documentary?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was not easy, I think, to be this vulnerable and to tell these details because she has a full life of training to keep them in. And so I'm so honored that she shared them with me and she was as vulnerable as she was. And I think she's truly what makes the film work. And often after people die, we want to say they were perfect in every way. But Tam is brave enough to say, no, Sally had flaws and Sally was complex. And there were things that were amazing and celebrated in public about Sally, but there were also things that were not amazing. And her need to keep things secret was much greater than Tam's at the time. And yet Tam was out and proud until she met Sally. And Sally kind of forced her back into the closet in some ways. And I really admire Tam's bravery in telling this story with the honesty that she does. I mean, I think sadly it's more relevant than it's ever been, this story of somebody hiding part of themselves to get where they want to go.
Sally Ride was the first female astronaut in space. I think she spent 6 days in space with that first mission. And then the rest of her life, especially the years immediately afterwards, she spent in the spotlight because of that. From what you learned about her, do you think that she thought that was a fair trade-off?
The interesting thing about Sally is she was so excited to get into space and so excited about astrophysics and space and, launching in a shuttle that a lot of people who I've talked to said they don't think she really thought through what it meant to live as a public figure for the rest of her life. Because she was and this is a big part of her story, she was a highly introverted person. She never discussed her sexuality with her mother. She didn't want to discuss it with her sister, who was married to a woman at the time. And so she didn't like talking about emotions very much. So for somebody like that to be recognized by everybody in the world at the time, she was the most famous person in the world in 1983. And so people would come up to her and they would be crying and telling her what she meant to them. And she just had this inability to process all of that emotion all at once. It makes her a very interesting person to follow, someone who doesn't want to share their emotions or be in public, but whose love for space and love for science thrusts them into the spotlight. It was a fascinating story to be able to tell.
Well, I have to ask, you and I both work in media. We ask questions and tell stories. And as you mentioned, part of your story here seems to be that the media was overly focused on Sally and her position as a female astronaut. What were you thinking listening back to some of her interviews?
Oh my gosh. I mean, they're crazy. They do show you how far we've come. I will say that. I mean, there is an obsession with talking about her anatomy and her, is she going to have to wear a bra in space? Will she be serving the men coffee? Will she cry if something hard happens? And one of my favorite scenes in the film is just the press conference that she had to endure before going up, because at the beginning of the press conference, she thinks she's going to get a lot of questions about science and her training. And you can tell she keeps trying to redirect the conversation back to what a good astronaut she is, or discuss the flight mission itself. But all anybody else wants to talk about is her reproductive organs. And if she's going to cry.
What else do you want audiences to take away from your documentary?
Yeah, I think the film is at a certain level about bravery and about different kinds of bravery. Sally was brave enough to launch into space, which I think as a kid was so striking to me. But as an adult, I'm really more moved by Tam's kind of bravery, which is to live authentically as the person you are, even if it's not popular at the time. And even if, the rest of society says you shouldn't. And so, I think it's a more relevant story than ever. There's also there's this very, very sexist, formerly sexist astronaut in the film Mike Mullane, who apologizes for how he thought about Sally at the time, how she thought, he was taking up a man's space and in the program, and she had no business being there. And he has a change of heart working with women and working with Sally in particular, and writes this beautiful apology letter. So I think, especially in this era of like whoever can scream louder is right, I think having that kind of introspection and saying, you know what, I was wrong, I was mistaken, I made a mistake and I want to apologize. I feel like there's an immense amount of bravery in that. And that's an energy that we should be celebrating now in 2025 especially.
Christina Costantini wrote and directed the documentary Sally. It premiered at Sundance, got its Texas premiere at South by Southwest, and is now coming to National Geographic and Disney+. Christina, thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, committed to strengthening the state's workforce and its communities through safety and wellness grants and education initiatives. More at texasmutual.com/community impact.
Is the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. After more than 3 years under a near-total abortion ban, Texas's 89th legislative session brought forth discussions about the ways Texans continue to access the highly restricted procedure. Olivia Aldridge of KUT reports on 3 bills that dominated conversations about abortion in this just-concluded session.
On the postcard, in the middle here, they want you to just fill out 1 or 2 sentences really quick on why you feel the abortion law needs to be fixed.
Back in February, near the beginning of the legislative session, Elise Rosenberg rallied community members at Austin's Temple Beth Shalom to participate in a letter-writing campaign on behalf of the interfaith group Texas Impact. Rosenberg, president of the National Council of Jewish Women's Austin chapter, said they were asking Texas legislators to clarify the narrow exception to the state's abortion ban.
No pregnant woman should die because her doctor's hands are tied.
In Texas, doctors are allowed to provide an abortion only to save a pregnant woman's life or a major bodily function. But many have said the exception is worded too vaguely. They don't know when they're allowed to act. There have been reports of women losing their lives due to that confusion. That's why, over the past 3 years, clarifying this exception has been a major goal for doctors, patients, and activists. That brings us to Senate Bill 31, also known as the Life of the Mother Act. It was filed by Senator Brian Hughes, the same lawmaker who helped the state virtually ban abortion in 2021. Here's Hughes explaining the bill at a committee hearing this spring.
This reflects something that most or all of us can agree on, that when the mother's in danger, that's an exception that Texas has always recognized.
The Life of the Mother Act says that a pregnant woman's death or impairment does not have to be imminent to be considered life-threatening. It also clarifies that doctors can talk about abortion with patients or colleagues while determining if it's the best treatment option. And it says that the burden of proof is on the state if a doctor is accused of offering an illegal abortion. The bill was written with input from both physicians and anti-abortion organizations. Not everyone got everything they wanted. Some groups say the law around protecting the life of the mother is still too vague. But many OBGYNs working in Texas were glad to see it passed. Dr. Todd Ivey of Houston says he still wants to see exceptions for lethal fetal anomalies, rape, and incest in the future. But he thinks the new law is a good first step.
And I do think it's going to clarify and help physicians feel protected to move forward in these really tragic cases and to protect women's lives. And that's what I think is the most important here.
The Life of the Mother Act now sits at the governor's desk. Other abortion bills did not provide common ground during the session. The state's abortion ban already includes medication abortion, but some people have still been able to get abortion pills through the mail. Senate Bill 2880 wanted to stop that. Senator Hughes was the author for this bill, too, and characterized it as a protective measure for women.
These are the pills that are being mailed into Texas directly to women, often without instructions, certainly without doctor's visits before and without follow-up care after.
The bill would have let Texans sue out-of-state prescribers and distributors of the pills, along with people and groups who helped pregnant women get access to them. Ultimately, SB 2880 sailed through the Senate, but failed to get to the House floor. The anti-abortion group Texas Right to Life accused some House Republicans of slow-walking the measure to prevent its passage. The group's president, John Sago, still hopes the governor will call a special session to give the bill a second chance.
It just seems like House leadership was apathetic to the top pro-life bills this session.
But another priority of anti-abortion groups did pass. Senate Bill 33 will stop local governments from using tax dollars to help people get abortions, specifically funding things like childcare and travel for people heading out of state for care. It takes aim at cities like Austin and San Antonio, which have approved similar funds. Sago called SB 33's passage a win. Overall, he was encouraged to see increased attention to the issues his coalition is focused on after the reversal of Roe v. Wade, women leaving Texas for abortions, and abortion pills entering the state.
There was a widespread awareness of these threats, whereas 2 years ago, we were really struggling to even break through for our friends, our elected officials that work on our issues.
How do abortion rights activists feel at the end of the session? For this coalition, too, there were wins and losses. There are also those groups who weren't convinced the Life of the Mother Act will make a positive impact. But Elise Rosenberg from the National Council of Jewish Women is cautiously optimistic.
Let's see how it works when it's needed. I want to see somebody who's pregnant and having, bleeding or having a problem and see what the doctors can do. I just want to know that it's really going to work.
And she says there's still a lot more she wants to fight for in the way of abortion rights in Texas. I'm Olivia Aldridge in Austin.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. And Wells Dunbar is listening to you. He's monitoring social media online on this Monday, the 9th day of June. Hard to believe it's already the 9th day of June. Wells, what are you seeing online today?
Well, we were talking about some of these runoff elections earlier in the program there. Heard a lot about the race in San Antonio. I'm looking at what was the early voting returns here from Garland, Texas, and it was a really remarkable story there. They shared this on the Garland subreddit, and honestly, Dylan Hedrick came in with 2,674 votes. The runner-up, Deborah Morris, came in with 2,645 votes. We're talking about a 30-vote difference, 29 if my math is correct there, actually. And amazingly, that lead held. And Dylan Hedrick, Garland's next mayor. But just a remarkable showing there. And
when it's that close, it's hard for me to believe that someone's not going to call for a recount when it's that close. Then again, it might not.
Possibly so.
Might not take that long, given that, usually these sort of off-season elections, you don't have much of a turnout. I was surprised. I don't know if you noticed this when we were talking with Joey Palacios of Texas Public Radio. They had like a 17% turnout in San Antonio, and that's quite
that's
good.
Actually good for one of these
that sounds low, but it's
elections.
Actually quite good for a local election. So anyway.
Yeah, it is amazing stuff that we do think of that in those terms. But of course, honestly, your vote goes really far. One Redditor here on these Garland results says that's got to be the closest I've seen an election, early results or otherwise. And the candidate Hedrick did extend that lead a little bit once the rest of the votes were tallied. But remarkable, and goes to show you how much you really can have a say and an impact in these local elections. While sticking with North Texas for a minute, you were touching on this earlier, David, just talking about some of these incredible weather scenes that descended upon the state. I was looking at some videos from Roby, Texas, there between Lubbock and Abilene.
Right.
Just, trailer parks with entire roofs blown off and decimated. Looking at a tweet here from Dylan Federico there with North Texas Fox affiliate, talking about the hurricane force winds, 69 degrees in Mineral Wells, 68 in DFW, 82 in Valley View, Cook County. So, glad that people tried to stay safe and the damage wasn't as bad as it could have been, David.
Indeed. Of course, you need to keep up with the weather by keeping it right here, tuned to your Texas Standard station. You keep up with the news 24/7, texasstandard.org. We'll be back here tomorrow.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family.